Welcome back to Alley Chats. I'm your host, Rob Southgate. Alley Chats is like a virtual artist's alley featuring interviews with artists, filmmakers, podcasters, writers, and really any creative person you might find at a pop culture convention. My goal is to help draw attention to cool people and hopefully help them get some new fans. I want this podcast to raise up these amazing people and to inspire you, the listener, to chase your dreams as well. You can follow Alley Chats on Facebook under Alley Chats Podcast and join in the conversations. I'll add more social media in the future, but for now, that is the best place to interact with us. You can also email me directly if you would like to be a guest or have a guest suggestion. My email is rob@smgpods.com. Ty, welcome to Alley Chats. I'm excited to have you here. It's another author. Anybody listening, it's another author, which you know I love. But now we've kind of hit my wheelhouse. We're getting into sci-fi, which we got a lot to talk about. Ty is, well, I should actually give your whole name. It is Ty Carlson, who is another member of Four Horsemen Publishing, which Four Horsemen Publications, I've talked about a lot on here. I just love what they've got going. And they're sending me authors. So guess what? We're going to talk to them. And lots of cool stuff in here, horror, sci-fi, fantasy, but you are a sci-fi writer. Yeah. Ty, let's start out. Oh, and also, I always say this, but all the links will be in the show notes. You can buy his books and you can communicate with him through the show notes. All right, that's out of the way. We'll say it again at the end. Ty, why don't you tell people who you are? Give a little background.
All right. Ty Carlson. I'm a middle-aged dude with a family and a regular old job, and I write on my off time or during lunches, or if I am not able to go to sleep, I'll stay up late. But I grew up in Arkansas, and so there's a lot of open land, and there's kind of a lot of kind of crazy stuff that happens in Arkansas. You know, you've got your classic cow tipping people, and then you've got your classic just good old-fashioned farm boys. But what
I've also seen Ozark. You also have your drug dealers and a few other things going on down there.
Yeah. There's a lot of that. There's also Walmart, which is great. We have what I've always loved is I've always loved escaping into books, and so I've been a reader since I could pick up a book. I've written. I remember my first little short story that I wrote was about quintuplets. I was one of five. I'm actually not one of five. I made that up. Surprise. And I did that when I was like 6, maybe 7. So I've always loved writing. I've always loved reading. In fact, I read so much when I was young that I got grounded from reading. And so my parents forced me to go outside and go touch grass. So
you took a book and you went outside, right?
That's essentially, I mean, I smuggled it outside. Yeah. I love reading. I love writing, and just kind of sharing weird what if stories with the world, and reading about, like, you know, if this had gone a different way, what would it look like? Or if this was real, what would that look like?
Yeah. You reminded me of a Harlan Ellison story that he told about himself. You know who Harlan Ellison is, right?
No.
Dear God. How do people not know? Harlan Ellison is one of my favorite authors. Quick. I feel like I talk about Harlan Ellison and I'm talking to a wall all the time. He's the author. I mean, he's influenced so much science fiction. He wrote City on the Edge of Tomorrow, the Star Trek episode that won the only Emmy it ever won in the beginning. He also wrote the story The Soldier, which is what the Terminator is based on.
Oh, wow.
You would love Harlan's work. It's amazing. He's also a big grump, and he's dead now. I've just given his whole life story. Thank you. I'm his biographer. But he told a story in one of his books, I believe, because he was also really self-reflective. He talked about his life a lot, where when he went to kindergarten, he was a big reader. And he goes to kindergarten, and they had a reading nook, and he's like, school's going to be awesome. Look at all these books. And he went right over to it and started reading. And the teacher came over and said, you can't read yet. We haven't taught you that. Took the book away and put him back in his chair. And he said, that was it. Screw this. I'm going to just pound my way through school to get it over with and get back to reading. And I thought, wow, that says a lot. I mean, boy, give the kid a book and let him go to town is what I would say.
Right.
You know? And my daughter, she's a writer also. And we used to force her outside. We're like, go outside. what does she do? We have these rocks by her garden. She'd walk around on the rocks, and we'd watch her out there just telling a story, talking it out until she could come in and read a book again. I'm like, oh my God. Guess what? We made a writer.
Yeah, us creatives, we're weird. We just
You're
can't
weird,
stop.
man. You're weird. So, okay, you are writing science fiction for Four Horsemen. Did I catch you saying this was your first science fiction book?
Yeah, so the bench is my first science fiction book. Yeah. I have two others that have been released, and the fourth one comes out in January. But yeah, this is it.
This is it. So you're doing a series, the Dadirri series. Am I saying that right?
Close. It's the Dadirri Saga. So Dadirri is an Aboriginal
I
word
put a
that means
G
like,
in there. There's no G. Okay.
I mean, it translated fine online. That means like critical thinking. I mean, that's like roughly translated. There's a lot more that goes into it, but it's like critically thinking about things in your life. And so that really encompassed what I wanted my books to focus on was our relationship with one another, but also our relationship with technology and kind of how, I mean, we see it all around us, like our further reliance upon it. What is that doing to our humanity? And so, yeah, critical thinking, Dadirri, they kind of fit really well together in the themes and the messages that I want to send through my words.
So the latest book is called Shadowless. There was The Bench,
Mhm.
then The Favorite, then The Shadowless. Are they anthology? Are they a continual series? I mean, I know it's a series, but is it one
Right.
story that you're leading to a conclusion?
It they're all same universe, same world, but different times in that universe. So they are leading to a conclusion, and that's kind of alluded to in each one. But they're standalone. You can read the bench, or you can read the favorite first, or start on the Shadowless, and it's not going to really make a difference in the story. Now, the fourth one that comes out. So the bench takes place like 80 years after this event, this war that happens, and the favorite happens 20 years before the war happens, and the Shadowless is like 200 years after the war happens. And so you get this idea of like what the world looks like in these snapshots, and then now with this fourth one that is actually an anthology of 3 short stories, it is like a year before the war happens. So everything's kind of converging. It's called
Oh,
Convergence of
yeah.
Gods. It's converging on this war that's going to happen. Um, and it details or it kind of goes into the lives of these three people that are directly involved in it. It's yeah, it's pretty cool. But they're all standalone, so you can kind of start wherever.
I actually love that. I talked to one of the other Four Horsemen authors recently, and I'm drawing a blank. So I'm going to vamp here while I try to figure out her name. But she wrote the Blood Witch books, and she told me the same
Marie,
thing. Yeah, Marie, yes. And
yeah,
she said it's the same thing where you can read the 9 books in any order, but that last book you're going to want to save for last.
yeah,
To me, that's just the best. It's almost like a choose your own adventure,
right,
plus you get your own, the way you're writing it, Maria DeVivo, that's her name. You get your own story. Because think about it, when we read a story, even when I read a collection of short stories, the order you read it in, you start creating threads. You start seeing
right,
things that maybe weren't there or that are there. And whatever order you read these books in, you're going to get your own experience for, which to me is a very video game idea, which I think we both like video games. We were just talking about that before I turned the mics on. And the best video games do that, where you can do the side quest or you can take the chapters out of order. And when you come back to the main story, which is the ultimate thing, you have had a singular experience that you can share with your friends, but their experience
right.
was different. I love that.
Yeah, I wanted it to be unique to the reader, and of course, with a limited number of books, you'll have repeated orders. But that exact reason is why I made them more standalone, is because when we read, we do start to build those connections. And if I haven't read any of them before, and I read the Shadowless first, that's going to change my perspective when I read the bench, and change my perspective when I read the favorite. As opposed to if I read the bench first, which is fine, and then read the Shadowless and the favorite, all these connections that you begin to build or paint a picture of what this world looks like or what the message is, and it's based on what you've understood or read about in the previous books. And so that's really what made them really special, and trying to subtly hint that they're connected without making it outright like this is the same person, or this is a, the same place or something like that.
Yeah. So, okay, we've kind of primed the pump on that, but I have questions about that go outside of this. One thing I
Right.
want to know: who are the science fiction authors? I mentioned Harlan Ellison, which you completely rejected. I don't know what your problem is. Uh, but who would you say are your biggest influences? And it doesn't have to be a
So
science fiction author.
sure. So I've always been a Orson Scott Card fan with Ender's Game. Um, Speaking for the Dead, the second novel, which he wrote actually first, I absolutely love. But until probably 5 years ago, I'd never read Stephen King. I was raised in a very conservative household growing up, and so Stephen King was like, you're not allowed to read that.
Yeah, right,
And
right.
I found that I really, really love his style of writing, and so he's had his, and just kind of the way that he pulls twists off, and the way that he writes is has always, since I've started reading him, really intrigued me. And then Edward Rice Burroughs, who wrote
Oh, yeah, Tarzan.
John Carter.
Oh,
Well, yeah,
John Carter. Yeah, the John
yeah,
Carter books are really,
yeah.
racism
I love
aside, they are
those.
amazing books.
Right. There's they kind of, gives me like fantasy sci-fi vibes, and that's
Yes.
something that I really loved about those. And I devour them. And of course, there's like all these little authors. I don't even think I could name them. There's a book called Locke that I read when I was in seventh grade that really kind of made me enjoy horror, and it's by this guy named Roger. I don't even remember his name now. I'll have to look it up. Um, but it was a book that I got at the book fair, and I read in an afternoon. I just devoured it, and I remember laying on my mom and dad's bed, and they're out there, everyone's in the living room talking, and I'm in my mom and dad's bed reading this book. And it was so fun, and I have it, and I gave it to my 5-year-old, and he carries it around with him still. But such a good memory about just these books that maybe they didn't affect me at that point, but I have such fond memories of them that they had some effect on me. Another probably big one was Brian Jacques and Robert Jordan. I
Yeah.
love those.
Yeah. Yeah. It is funny. When we're talking about like the things that inspired us now, uh, the things that I read as a kid that got in that to this day, like I remember in high school on my own reading Slaughterhouse-Five, and
Mm,
the first sentence, Billy Pilgrim became unstuck in time, has never left me. And it is, to me, it's like there's the greatest first sentence. Everyone talks about it was the best times, it was the worst times. I'm like, nope, that one's great. But the greatest is Billy Pilgrim became unstuck in time, because it is a world in one sentence.
yeah,
Like my imagination right now is exploding saying it. So I get that. Ender's Game is a great example too. Ender's Game is one of those wonderful entry points. It's great to read as an adult. That whole series is great to read, but as a kid, because you
yeah,
connect with that kid, and the twist is so awful. It's so
yep,
horrible. It is a view changing book. You
yeah,
know what I mean?
yeah. You get to the end and you think, I thought I was reading about a kid this whole time, and now I'm realizing I'm reading as an adult, and
Yeah.
I've transitioned from child to adult because of this one thing that has happened. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
kind of a while. I remember the first time that I finished it, I was just kind of like, what?
Yeah.
Wow.
Right. Right. Yeah, me too. And actually, when you said John Carter, I got lost in that one. I loved it. Like it was before I still haven't seen the movie. I have it, but we had seen a play, a theatrical version of it by Otherworld Theater,
Oh wow.
and it was astounding. And I was like, wow, I remember reading this years ago, but like it didn't stick with me, probably because of
Hmm.
the language. I was younger when I read it, didn't
Yeah.
stick. But I was like, wow, I remembered as things are going on, I'm remembering story in it. So then I went back and I reread it. And once again, racism aside, think about when it was written.
Right.
It was like, I can't believe when this was written,
Yeah.
what he was
Yeah.
telling.
It's an amazing story, and every time I pick it up to read it again, I'm blown away. Once again, I was like, I forgot how rich this story is, and there's just so much to it.
He also does one of my favorite things in that, the janky getting from Civil War on the Earth to Mars. It's just like, and we're here. And I'm like,
yeah,
I bought it. It.
That's the great thing about sci-fi is you can just do whatever you want with it. You can explain the magic or the technology, or you can just be like, and then this thing happens and everyone accepts it as normal. Okay,
right.
Cool.
Well, and some of the best sci-fi will go back once the author finally figured out, like, oh, I have a way that could have happened. They'll go back in book 6 and explain it, and then the whole thing changes for you, even though they just figured it out.
Right. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. The secrets with authors is that you get to do that. The readers think, oh man, this author's just so smart. They've been building to this. And the author was really just like, I don't know how this works.
Yeah. Right. So you said, I know that we talked about video games some. You're a video game guy. I know you have some tattoos that show off your love.
Yes, This is, hang on, let me organize it to the camera. It's a Destiny tattoo for the class, a warlock class that I play.
Nice. So you're a big Destiny guy.
Yes, I am.
How long have you been playing? 6 months, and I got a tattoo.
I've been playing since Destiny 1 launched, which was 2014 maybe.
That sounds about right.
I think it was 2014. And it's the only game that I play because I decided with 4 kids and a full-time job that either I can be bad at all games that I pick up, or I can be mediocre at one game. And I just decided one game. I'm just gonna commit. So that's what I do. Yeah, I play when I have time.
Do you find that in your writing that Destiny or concepts from Destiny are slipping in?
So one thing that I love about Destiny so much, and we had mentioned it a few minutes ago, is just the story that seems so much broader than what your original understanding of it is. And I try to pull that in a little bit. And of course, there's always going to be that. I try to avoid just outright.
Oh yeah, like, of course.
This is definitely a thing. But the way that the stories in Destiny kind of come about they're really cool, and their writers are very inspiring. So I do try and keep in mind of if I want to utilize this in the future in a different way, Destiny does it like this. That's a really great path that I could take. And so, yeah, I've spent many hours in that universe. So I would be very surprised if it didn't affect it at all.
Yeah, that there's some bleed through. Do you find that outside things, outside of books and obviously Destiny, I know they all influence what we create, but do you find yourself thinking about it, like noticing it before you create it, or is it one of those things you've written and you're like, oh man, that is totally Dadirri, and Pennywise lives there?
So I probably, like a lot of authors, just my mind is constantly making stories. The Shadowless actually is based on a dream that I had where my 5-year-old died, so that was cool. And the bench is, it was fun. The bench is based on a question I saw on Facebook that I asked my wife. If you could sit on a bench with someone living or dead for an hour, who would it be? And she said, oh, it'd be my dad, because her dad died when she was young. And I was like, oh, okay, so how would that work? And so then I started making the idea. So there's constantly things that are happening that I think, oh, wouldn't that be interesting if that was a book? I mean, I drove by an old dilapidated train station in Podunkville, Arkansas, and I thought, I wonder if that could be a story. The ghost trains have been done before, but I wonder if I could make it different enough to be relevant. So yeah, I mean, all of the time I've got notes on my phone, hundreds of notes on, this would be kind of a fun idea for a book. This would be a fun idea for a book. And they just keep piling up.
Yeah. I'm not a writer, and I've got them too. I've got a ghost story that's eating me alive right now. And I'm like, I don't even know where it goes, but I have one and it's eating me alive, and I get it.
I get it. Yeah. They just kind of sit there until you think. I'll scroll through them every now and then. I think for this most recent one, I was scrolling through and I thought, oh, you know what? I could actually put this in there. That'd be kind of cool. And so I added that in from years ago whenever I created this idea.
Yeah. One thing when I was reading your bio and you said you love to have the what if, to me, that's the best part. That really is, like, even when you go back to Marvel Comics and they had the what if series, sure, we're going to mash this character and this character, but it's that idea of what if. That's where you find the gold. Like, what
Yeah.
if I mashed these two things up? What if a ghost train did blank or whatever? That's when you start getting those really rich, fun ideas to play with.
Yeah, because most of the time someone's already thought that before, but to have it played out in such a way that's like, I mean, what's that old statistic? Like 98% of people start a book but don't ever finish it, and those that finish it only, 5% get published or whatever. Like, chances are someone has thought, oh, that'd make a good book.
Sure.
And then that's where the idea has ended. So to be able to go in and kind of flesh it out, and be the vessel for that is pretty exciting.
Now, do you find yourself in your trajectory as a writer? Did you find yourself writing short story first? Did you go right into long form? What was your thing?
I have a it's over 100,000 words, a fantasy novel on this computer that I started in 7th grade that looks a lot like The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time accidentally. It's long and it's weird and it's probably never going to be finished, but I went right into like, let's do high fantasy. Let's just go all full tilt,
Sure.
write it all. I like the idea of short stories, but the short stories that I have in book 4, I wanted to intentionally be short because they are almost like these real short, quick jabs at like, here's this character, here's this character, here's this character, and here's why they're important. And it's almost like just a blast of information. I much prefer longer novels, or at least long novels, not necessarily short stories.
So was that 7th grade you all into Christopher Paolini, and you were like, I'm going to write the next Aragorn?
I was not a fan of Christopher Paolini whenever I started reading him. I think he's fine now. But I just wasn't a fan. I read Aragon and I had a really hard time finishing it. I was reading Wheel of Time and Sword of Truth series.
Okay,
and
you were already onto that.
yeah, I was
It's
in the big
kind of going backwards, even though I respect what he
right.
did.
Sure.
He was a teenager. It's kind of like reading Lord of the Rings and then going back and reading that, and you go, okay, I got it.
Yeah. It's definitely not comparable. But my 14-year-old loves. He read all 4 of those, ate them up,
Oh, I'm sure.
and which is great. He hadn't read Lord of the Rings or Wheel of Time yet, so he was fascinated with them. So that was it was good. But I was I was really into just devouring every book that I could get my hands on whenever I was younger.
Yeah. I remember having this weird fantasy when I was probably 7th and 8th grade about going to the science fiction section in the library. And I'm like, by the time I'm 40, I'm going to have read every title on that shelf. And it was like, then I started doing the math and I'm like, no.
Yeah.
No, but what a fantasy I was having about that. Of course, I bought all those books and they're all piled up around here because we all have a stack of shame. You know what? I'm sure I still have Atari games I didn't get to. But eventually,
all of those things. I've got my nightstand. My wife hates it. My nightstand is just stacked with books that I'm either in the process of reading or they're next on the list. And about once every 6 months, she'll just clean it off and put them in the closet. And then the books that I want to read or I am reading, I'll as I read them,
sneak them back out.
Yeah,
I'm the same way. I got a Jeff Tweedy book that I got halfway through in one sitting, and it's still sitting on my nightstand. And so many books have come and gone, and every time that gets put away, I'm like, oh no, I want to read this book.
Yeah,
and I can finish it in one sitting. It's fabulous, but it's not like reading Lord of the Rings where you got to sit down for a while.
Right.
Yeah, I get it.
I recently, when I was in Chicago, I read on the flight home, and I finished a book shortly after I got home, and I was like, man, that's the closest. I mean, that's the fastest I've read a book because I didn't have any other responsibilities for about 24 hours.
Yeah. I remember I was at the end of my bachelor's. And it was like it's funny. I finished my bachelor's and I read all through my bachelor's. I graduated, or I finished the last class, and I didn't read for like 3 years. I couldn't read. I couldn't focus. But even through it, I did. And right towards the end, there was a weekend. A guy I worked with had read the first of the Hunger Games books, and this is way before they made movies. And he was like, trust me, you're going to love this. And that was probably the fastest. I did all 3 books in like a week. And I was like, oh my God, you couldn't put it down.
Yeah, they are my wife is a slow reader, and so she wanted to read
So am
them
I.
together, which means I read them to her. And so we were into it there for a little while. Same thing with Twilight. I read Twilight to her
How do
too.
you do Hunger Games slowly though? Oh my God. I'm a slow
Lots of
reader.
nights where we couldn't finish.
I'm a slow reader. It's funny. I will gain speed here and there, but I've always been a slower reader. My wife is blinding fast. And my daughter is a voracious reader. Yeah, we tried that same thing. It's kind of like the ultimate when we were talking about what you started with. I had a thought. It's kind of like when people ask, so you've got your kid, you're going to introduce them to Star Wars. What order do you show them the movies in? And that's a
Right.
real legit question for most of us nerds. Like we have to think about it. Well, when
Yeah.
you talk about like exposing them to sci-fi or fantasy or horror, where do you start them? Because if you start them in the wrong place, that kiddie stuff becomes irrelevant, but it was so vital to the story for you back then.
Yeah, it's very, very true. Yeah, I turned my kids on to Ender's Game early, and I let them do the audiobook and follow along in the real book.
Yeah.
So that they had something in their hands to hold. And they loved Ender's Game. And I tried to get them into Speaker for the Dead, and they were less interested because it was very it was more adult. So
yeah, it's darker for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So trying to get them into it and be like, okay, I'm trying to get you to read this. These are really valuable.
Yeah, at some point you got to give up, but
yeah, it's like, okay, fine, read whatever you want. It's been tricky.
Did they get to the end? I mean, like they're 5 years old. They get to the end of Ender's Game. Did they first use the F word and throw the book at you when they realized what was happening in that book?
Yeah. So Finley, my oldest, read it whenever he was 12, and Asher, my now 11-year-old, read it whenever he was 10. They were both irritated. They came to me and they were like, I can't.
You're the worst, Dad.
I don't know if I understand it, but is this what happened? And I was like, yeah, isn't that crazy? And they were like, I didn't like it. Like, well, fine.
You're not supposed to. It's supposed to make you feel very uncomfortable.
Exactly. Yes, that's what that was the goal there.
That's really funny. So what order do you tell them to watch Star Wars? What order did you introduce it in?
You got to go 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3.
7, 8, 9?
Because no, those don't exist.
Oh, wow.
Those are trash. Those are trash. I listen, there's not very many soapboxes that I get onto, but the soapbox of the most recent trilogy, Star Wars trilogy, is I'm avoiding bringing it out. But 4, 5, and 6, because you got to get who Luke is, who Vader is, and then 1, 2, and 3 is why he became that or how he became that. And that's the way that I showed them.
So no Rogue One, no Solo.
Okay, Rogue One is different. Rogue One is probably the best Star Wars that was made. Solo's okay. Solo's entertaining.
I agree.
But
I agree on both of those. Solo got trashed, and I'm like, why did this get trashed? It's just a fun movie. I want to see more.
There wasn't any message necessarily. Maybe there was, and I just missed it. But there wasn't any message. There wasn't any like grand theme. You already know the story of Han Solo, and you know the story of Chewbacca, and you know the story. So it was more just fleshing that out, and I thought it was fun. I had fun watching it with my kids.
Yeah, me too. All right. So last question. This is a Comic-Con. I forgot to ask this on the last one of these podcasts. So anyone listening, sorry about that. But Ty is now put to the test. This is the ultimate pop culture con, Comic-Con, whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
Who is that one guest that you really want to meet?
Oh, man.
Before you ask living or dead, this is your ultimate Comic-Con. So whatever that means to you.
Okay. I would really like to meet Ewan McGregor for a lot of different reasons. One of my favorite movies is Big Fish, that he was in decades ago, I guess.
God, that's a good movie. Yes.
But the story about his relationship with his dad, and like just imagination and everything. It resonated with me when I was a lot younger. And then of course with him being Obi-Wan and the new Obi-Wan show, which was just like incredible. And he's just a fantastic person.
Yeah.
Everything, of course, everything you read online probably isn't true, but from what I have read and what I understand, he's a very normal, down to earth kind of guy. And I think it seems like the type of guy that'd be like, hey, do you want to go get a beer? Yeah, let's go get a beer and just like talk. I think that'd be cool.
Oh, he's Scottish, so the answer is yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Actually, that's a great one. I've been a fan of his since when we saw Trainspotting in the theater way back, and I was like, this guy is an amazing actor. Then we immediately went out and we got what's the one he did before that? The cover had a spiral on it. I can't remember. It was a murder in a house, and he's fantastic in it. And from then on, I was like, okay, he's awesome. And then when you saw him in Little Voice, do you ever see Little Voice?
Oh, I forgot he was in that.
He's what is it, a painter or a plumber? And he's fantastic. I just made phenomenal and fantastic a word.
It works.
But he's incredible. And this guy is becoming a movie star, and he's taking this role where he is just wallpaper. And it's like, wow. That guy can act. And yes, Obi-Wan, he's amazing. How do you follow Alec Guinness? And he does. I mean, it's like he is as much the character as Alec Guinness. That's an impossible feat.
Yep. Yeah, there's a very smooth transition between those two. He nailed it. Yeah. That'd be my bucket list item is
all right. Well, let's see if we can make that one happen someday. That one is doable. Right. When people name somebody dead for 200 years, I'm like, how am I going to introduce you to Rasputin? That is never going to happen. Yeah. And why would you want to meet Rasputin? But Ewan McGregor, I want to meet him too. So
more possible.
You and I will be at a con. We'll invite him to dinner. We'll see what happens.
Yes.
Stranger things have happened.
That's true.
Ty, where can people find you and interact with you?
I'm on most social media platforms, but TikTok is really where I'm most active, and I get the most engagement. And I love talking and kind of going back and forth with people. So if you want to find me, you can find me on TikTok as Ty Carlson author.
Awesome. We'll put a link in the show notes. We'll also put a link to the Four Horsemen Publications website where they can buy your books. And I really encourage you to. These books are super cool. In fact, I have not added them to my library. They are getting added to my library because I'm telling you, you have hit all the right buttons here.
Well, thank you.
Sounds incredible. And I want to get on board before we get to that 10th book. So I got to get reading. I'm a slow reader. You know that. So Ty, thank you so much for being on. This was a blast.
Absolutely.
I'll have you on something else in the future. Maybe when book 5 comes out, we'll come back. I look forward to it. Ty, this was great. Thank you.
Thanks. Have a great one.
You can connect with me on social media or via email. All the links are found in the show notes. Oh, and it would really help me if you would rate and review this show on whatever platform you use to listen to this podcast. Good reviews help others find the show, which ultimately helps these incredible guests get more exposure. Alley Chats is a production of Southgate Media Group, hosted, produced, and edited by me, Rob Southgate. Thanks again for listening to Alley Chats. And don't forget to support